This is Mark Cabanis for Hollywood 360, and I'm coming to you from Hollywood, sitting in the home of the legendary Bob Barker, who was, of course, the star of the longest-running game show in television history, The Price is Right. Bob also had a very successful run on the popular Truth or Consequences game show. In a career that spanned 5 decades, Bob Barker was inducted into the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences Hall of Fame, and during his 35 years of hosting The Price is Right, won an astounding 19 Emmy Awards. In his spare time, he managed to host the Miss Universe pageant for 21 consecutive years. Now, if all this weren't enough, Bob has been a tireless supporter of animal rights, making an incredible difference in the lives of helpless animals who would have no voice were it not for Bob. Of course, I could go on and on about Bob's career, but we only have so much time with him today, so let's enjoy our moments now with this television icon. Welcome, Bob, to Hollywood 360.
Thank you very much, Mark. And after listening to that very, very flattering introduction, I think all those years on television, I should have had you as my agent.
Believe me, I would have loved nothing more, and it's never too late for any of that. Well, Bob...
Too late for me.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And, Bob, it's just great to be here with you, and I know our listeners are envious of me to be able to sit here in this beautiful home here with you on this beautiful day in Hollywood. And, Bob, first of all, before we get into your career and talk all about that, talk about this home. I mean, it's historic of sorts, and you have some certificates to prove that, I believe.
That's right. I was living, Dorothy Jo, my wife, and I were living in the San Fernando Valley. And we wanted an old Spanish home, and believe it or not, at that time we couldn't find one out there. And she found this beautiful home here in Hollywood. And so we came back. We'd lived here before. We came back to Hollywood, and she loved this house. She loved this house. And when she was terminally ill, she said, I hope that someday they don't make the house into an apartment house. And then I discovered that if I could have it have the city make it an historic monument, why a cultural monument, nothing is forever, but on the other hand, it would be much more difficult to change the house. Mm-hmm. So I made the application, and a committee came out, and we went through the house, and they said, by all means. And so now it is an historic cultural monument, and I've reached an age where I fit right in.
I love it. I love it. Well, indeed, you are an icon, Bob. There's no question about that. And after 50 years...
I was referring to my age.
Exactly. You know, after 50 years on the air, though, such stories I know you have to tell. And let's start with Truth or Consequences. I remember watching it, early in my life and loving it for so many reasons. And you always maintaining order among what became controlled fun chaos. Talk about that show. How did it get started and your memories of it?
Well, Ralph Edwards started the show years and years ago in radio. It was before television. In fact, it was the most popular radio show in the United States in 1941. And I was out here doing a radio show, and he, by this time, was doing This Is Your Life. And he had sold Truth or Consequences as a television show on NBC 5 days a week. And he was auditioning host in New York, and he was auditioning host out here in Hollywood, and he hadn't found just the one he wanted. And he just happened to turn on my radio show, and he liked the way I worked, so he called me in. I went through a series of auditions, and on December 21st, 1956, at 5 minutes past 12 noon, he called me and said, I was the man. It was my first national show.
Wow.
And every December 21st after that, Ralph and I had lunch together, and at 5 after 12, we had a toast to our long enduring friendship, all the rest of his life.
I love that story. I mean, that is incredible, and what a legend he was also. And I remember seeing on YouTube and other places the clip of him introducing you for the very first time. And what was it he said?
He said, "This is a young man who's going to be around for a long time."
So not only was Ralph Edwards a kind man and a smart man, but he was certainly prodigious in that sense, and was exactly right in predicting the future, because indeed you have done just that.
You know, when you say he was a smart man, he was indeed that. But his talents go far beyond just intelligence. He was an excellent writer. He was a splendid producer. He's one of the finest hosts who ever worked. And just to show you how really able he was, he had this idea for a radio show, Truth or Consequences. It was based on a game that he and his family used to play when they were living on a farm. And he sold it, he helped write it, he produced it, he hosted it, and it became the most popular radio show in the United States, and he was 27 years old. 27 years old, and he put all that together. And among all the things he did, he sold it. That was probably the most important thing.
Exactly, that's incredible. So he obviously a creative talent, a business talent, and had all of those things working for him. Truth or Consequences, of course, was an audience participation show, and Bob, that became your specialty. No one has ever done audience participation shows like you have for a number of reasons. So talk about your feeling towards audience participation shows.
Well, first of all, no matter how much natural talent you have for doing audience participation, there is no substitute for experience. That's why so many of these hosts today seem to be uneasy or don't know how to seemingly handle situations and so on, because there's no place to learn it. Linkletter, he started when he was in college. Ralph Edwards, he started when he was in college. I got my first job when I was still in college, and we did hundreds, thousands of shows. Before I ever did Truth or Consequences, my first national show, I had done radio shows here in California daily, and sometimes 2 a day for 6 years. Dorothy Jo wrote them, and I wrote them. We wrote them together. She produced them. And when I was back in college even, Dorothy Jo worked with me on shows. And I had the opportunity to do audience participation. I'll tell you a quick story. I was working there in this radio station, and it was a small station, Springfield, Missouri. And in those days, you had the opportunity to do all sorts of things if you worked at the radio station. And I had done sports, and I had done news, and I was a staff announcer and all of this. But one day, and I had decided I'd like to stay in radio. Mm-hmm. And Dorothy Jo and I realized that if I were going to do something on a national level, I had to specialize. I couldn't be a jack of all trades. And so I was trying to decide what I wanted to specialize in. And one day, a host of a game show that came on my shift as an announcer, so I knew the show, he didn't show up. And he was a fellow who was not ashamed to take a drink, and he must have taken one too many that day. But in any event, I'll drink to that, because he didn't show up. Yeah. And the manager of the station, G. Pearson Ward, he came rushing into me, and he said, "Bob, you've got to do this show." Everything was live then, you see. And I wasn't even nervous. I'd never been before an audience before in my life. I never been in a school play, wow. But I didn't have time to get nervous. Yeah. I ran in, grabbed the microphone, and we were on the air. Yeah. And I'll never forget, I started talking with a lady, and I said something, then she said something, and I said something, and they roared with laughter. And it startled me. I actually kind of jumped. Yeah. And I thought, oh, that's a beautiful sound. I'm going to try to make them do that some more. And I did, and it worked. So when I went home, fortunately, Dorothy Jo had heard that radio show, and she said, "Barker, that's what you should do." She said, "You did that better than you've ever done anything else." She didn't say I was good, just said I did it better than I'd ever done anything else. And we took off from that day on to get me a national show.
And the rest is history. That's
The rest is history. That's right.
absolutely. I mean, what an incredible story. And but I love, Bob, the way through the years when I've watched you many times, how you've taken a malfunction of a game on The Price is Right or whatever it happens on Truth or Consequences and some of the other shows you've been on, and you turn that mistake into hilarity, and you make. You always have been generous with the contestants too. I think you've always seen them kind of as the stars.
Well, these contestants, until I started doing Price is Right, I always did my own warm-up on Truth or Consequences, even from day one. And I always chose my own contestants. And I chose them very carefully because I knew what the consequence was to be, and I tried to get just the right person for that. Mm-hmm. And they were little gems to me. They were little golden nuggets. If it weren't for them, I'd have to work for a living. And I have always had great respect for contestants. Never put a contestant down. Always try to help them in every way I could. But at the same time, have as much fun and get as many laughs as we possibly could.
Absolutely. Let's talk specifically, Bob, about Truth or Consequences and that show. Maybe after all those years of doing it, any particular stunt or reunion? Truth or Consequences was famous for those beautiful reunions where you would reunite a soldier with his mother or a spouses or something like that. But does anything in particular really jump out at you as you remember?
Well, yes. Well, several things jump out. But one of my very favorites it probably became one of my very favorites because of a little boy about 8 or 9 years old. I laugh to just think about him. In any event, we were going to play a joke on a kid, and it was to be a baseball type joke, and actually it was softball. But in any event, we invited a team, a group of young boys there, and in their uniforms. And I went out in the audience, and I did my own warm-up, and then I started looking for contestants, and I found this kid. And he was a cute kid just to look at, but he had a wonderful personality. And so I said, "Would you like to play ball on the show today?" "Oh, yeah, I sure would." So I brought him up there. Yeah. And I brought a couple of his friends along, too. But he was my boy. Uh-huh. And then I said, I'm going to find a young lady or two to play baseball with these guys. We're going to have a girls' team against a boy. And I chose a girl and another girl or two. And I said, "Now you'll be the pitcher to this girl." And so she took the softball and went across the stage. And the other one, I said, "Over here, you be the catcher. This young lady, you're gonna catch. You go back here." And then I went to my boy, and I said, "You're gonna be at bat." Oh boy, he got up there. And I said, "Now she's going to throw this softball. She's going to throw the ball to you, and I want you to hit it as hard as you can. We have a big curtain over there. You smash it." He said, I'm ready, boy." And this girl, wham, and she was a professional. And that ball just went, you could hardly see it. Bam! And this catcher was her sister, and she caught her professionally. And this little boy said, "That's an artificial ball." And I said, "There's nothing wrong with that ball. Give me the ball." And the catcher gave me the ball. I said, "Look at that." I said, "That ball is perfect." Then he said, "She's got an artificial arm." And by this time, you see, I'd set it up before we had them off stage. And I'd explained it to the audience. they were screaming. And this little boy was so cute and just so completely amazed. I mean, his eyes were as big as saucers. That was one of my favorites.
Oh, that is incredible. You know, what do you think? Well, let me ask this. What was your favorite thing about Truth or Consequences overall? Just was it the spontaneity of it all? Was it the stunts, the mixture therein of the reunions, but what are some of the favorite elements that you liked so much about that show doing it?
Well, my favorite thing was payday.
I'll bet. Absolutely.
But you mentioned reunions.
Yes.
The reunions were tearjerkers frequently. They were hilarious frequently. They were wonderful. And I might add, Ralph spotted it, and that's what led him into This Is Your Life. This Is Your Life was spawned by our reunions. And we had great fun with those, too.
They were wonderful, and that I didn't know about. This Is Your Life being spawned, or Truth or Consequences spawning This Is Your Life. That's incredible. What a great show that was.
It was one of the most popular spots on the show. People loved those reunions, and Ralph, as I said, he was very bright. He said, aha, I know what I could do, and he did it.
And it was a good mixture, because in the course of one show, you had crazy, funny, wacky stunts, and then you're crying 10 minutes later, and so it was a beautiful, unique combination.
It really was, and it was frequently. We would I would describe what we were going to do to the audience before we did it, and but the people didn't hear that, of course. And you never knew what was going to. One reunion I will never forget. We had two sisters, and one lived out here in the San Fernando Valley, as a matter of fact, and another was still in Italy. They were Italians, and so we had it all set up to surprise the one here. We had the one from Italy flown over here to surprise her sister, and I won't go into all the details, but she was going to appear just suddenly right out of the audience, the one from Italy. So this woman is standing beside me, and so I said something to her, and we were talking, and I said, well, now, we need someone from the audience. I said, how about that lady right there? And I said, stand up. And she stood up. The one on stage, bam, out cold, fainted dead away.
Wow.
Didn't say a word, didn't say it's my sister or anything else. Out. So it was near the end of the show, and we wound it up that way with everybody standing over her because it was live. See, everything was live.
Wow.
And so the next day we thought, well, we'll do it again and show that the sisters are this is a tender moment, but funny. Yeah. She said, I said, fine, we'll bring them together again on the stage. One knew the other one was here now, right. but we'll show them that she's all right and everything. So we brought out the lady who had fainted first. It was from stage right. And I said, you see, here's whatever her name is. Here's Gloria. See, she's just fine, aren't you? Yes, yeah. And she's so happy to be with her sister. And here's her sister. And that sister stepped on, and she fainted again. She fainted again. Why she'd faint again? She knew she was here, but she's out. But it was early enough in the show. I said, well, I'm through. She's just going to stay here now.
I love that. And that was the other thing that was always so much fun, Bob, about how you would handle a situation from that, because you were saying exactly what we were all thinking.
Well, what are you going to do when everybody's fainting away on you here? There's no place to go.
That's right. That's right. Oh, I love it. Well, and all of those moments during Truth or Consequences, of course, then you went on to more spontaneous, never to be substituted moments on The Price is Right. And the longest running game show in television history to this day. And certainly, Bob, a tribute to what you did, along with Mark Goodson, I'm sure. But you made that show work, and And so, talk about the beginnings of that show. And I remember, watching it when it first began back in those days. I think it was 1973.
72.
72, and they called it maybe for a year or two The New Price is Right.
Price is Right.
So talk about the beginning of that show, Bob.
Well, Price is Right had been a very successful show on radio and early television, too, with Bill Cullen. And his show, though, when they did Price is Right with Bill, they were all just seated there at a table, and they would bring in something, and people would bid on it. And it was the only thing about the show that I did that resembled the first Price is Right was Contestants Row, when they bid down there in Contestants Row to get up on stage. Mm-hmm. But Mark Goodson, in all of his wisdom, he realized that the original Price is Right was too slow for television. There wasn't enough going on. And so he originated this idea with these pricing games. And he called me. Before I tell you, well, I'll tell you about what we did, but then there's a funny twist to this, too. In any event, I went over and met with him, and he told me he only had 5 games at the time. And we talked about them, and I said, Mark, I think this will work, which was the understatement of all time. Right. I said, I think this will work. He said, I do too. He said, we will. We'll have a good long run. But I don't think he thought about the years that we had. But in any event, and we made a deal for money. Mm-hmm. And he was always very generous with me. But I found out later that Bud Grant, who was the head of daytime at that time on CBS, had told Mark Goodson that he would buy the new Price is Right if he got Bob Barker to host it. Now, Mark didn't tell me that when we talked money. Mm-hmm. And as I said, he was very generous with me. But he would have been more generous with me if I'd known that.
Absolutely, I can imagine. What, do you remember the very first show?
I wore a green suit. That's all I remember about it. I see. They show that invariably. They'll show that, and here I am in that green suit. And I've never had another green suit, nor do I plan to have one.
I love it. After all those years of hosting it, Bob, did you have any favorite games that you liked the contestants to play?
Well, there's no doubt in the world about the favorite game. The favorite game was Plinko. Oh. Everybody loved Plinko. Mm-hmm. I liked Plinko too. But what I liked were the games that gave me an opportunity to really have fun with the contestant, interact with the contestant, and hopefully bring the audience into it too. A game like I forget for the moment what we even called it. We had a game where I offered, unbeknownst to the contestant, the contestant had a chance to win not 1, not 2, but 3 cars. But it all depended on the build-up. Right. But I had such fun with this game. I'd get the contestant, and I'd say, now, I'm going to give you a chance to win this. And they'd throw open the curtains, and here, it's a new car. Oh, boy, and she's out of her mind, And the audience is applauding. And not only that, you can win this. And there's a second car. And now they're just going crazy. She can win 2 cars. But audience, look at this. She can win this. And it's the 3rd car. By now, the audience is on the walls, and the woman is out of her mind or mad, whatever I have up there. And that's the kind of a game I could really have fun with. Mm-hmm. And even if she didn't win 1 car, you've had a great spot there because of the excitement you could build. I like that kind of thing where you could really get them going.
Absolutely, and I love the way you would build suspense within a game where, if it were the punch. I can't remember the punching game where they punched out the little slots and. But where they would punch in, you would pull out one of the slips of paper, and it might have been $500 or $10,000. But you would always build the suspense in what was, on that card. And I love the way you did that because it was just enhancing the experience for the audience and the contestant.
Everybody likes that, of course. It builds excitement in the audience, and it builds excitement at home. People were screaming in front of their television sets, I understand, about half the time.
I was one of them, absolutely. After all those years of hosting it, Bob, do you ever tune in The Price is Right these days?
Occasionally I do turn it on just to see what's going on. Yeah. And I've got to tell you, Drew Carey, bless him, he was hired, and I had never met him. But I thought, even before that, I was hoping whoever they hired would continue to do the plug for the spay-neuter. And they hired Drew, and I was going to meet him. And I thought, I'm going to try to get him to agree to this. And I shook hands with him. While we were still shaking hands, he said, I'm going to do the spay-neuter plug as long as I'm the host of The Price is Right. And so he's my man.
Indeed, and he does still do it to this day, of course. And, of course, the Studio 33 at CBS, where the show is taped, is legendary in and of itself, having taped so many other shows there, but especially The Price is Right. And, of course, while you were still there, they renamed that studio the Bob Barker Studio, which carries your name to this day.
Right, and I'm deeply grateful for it. I really am. It was very, very nice of CBS.
Take us back, Bob, to after doing the show all of those years, the moment, what it felt like to stand behind the Traveler, as you always used to call it on Truth or Consequences, the Doors, and that theme, that iconic theme starts up, and there you are, and the audience is on their feet, and the announcer, of course, Johnny Olson for many years, come on down with that signature phrase and Johnny's voice, and then the doors open and you step out onto the stage. What must that have been like for all of those years?
I never ceased enjoying it. I have been blessed, and I say this frequently. I've really been blessed because I started doing audience participation, as I told you, when I was still back there in Springfield, Missouri, at that little station, and I did it all of my life, and I never had a morning when I got up and thought, oh, I don't want to go to work. I loved it. I enjoyed it. And I think the shows that I did were successful in part because I obviously did enjoy it, and people enjoyed them along with me. But I did. I frequently say that if it weren't for television, I would have had to work for a living.
It makes me think of what my high school drama teacher always told us, Bob. She said that if you have fun, so will the audience. And that's exactly what you're saying, and you're exactly right. I mean, you did have fun, and that's one of the many reasons that I think the show lasted all of those years and thrived all of those years because, television, as you well know, chews things up and spits them out in about a New York minute. I mean, it's nothing. It's a way in terms of how television, just by its very nature, especially nowadays, can chew things up and spit them out, and they don't have a lot of time to always gain an audience or whatever. But to do what you did with that show is historic and unbelievable, and you certainly laid the groundwork for the franchise, if you will, to last for years to come because you made it such a strong brand because of all of the things you did, and you became executive producer of the show for several years, and so it had your touch on it in that respect too. So again, just congratulations for that matter. I know when you retired, it was unbelievable, as well as it should have been. How CBS and Les Moonves and Adam Sandler came on to surprising you. We're going to talk about him a little bit later. But and then the special they did on CBS about your 50 years in broadcasting, so well deserved and so beautifully done. How did it feel to go through all of that? I mean, they didn't want you to retire. I remember your last final show when the audience was on their feet saying, "No, no, don't go." And Les Moonves, head of CBS, says, "Oh, Bob, you can change your mind any minute. You could still be hosting it today if you wanted." But I think you knew when it was time for you to let go. And of course, it's like Johnny Carson. He left at the right time, and you left totally on the top of your game. So how does that feel?
Well, I think that I am completely content in retirement because I did retire at just the right time. Not too soon, not too late. The show itself was a part of Americana. It was tops in ratings, and it was loved across the country. And personally, I thought I was doing the show as well as I ever had. And I thought it was becoming a little strained physically. There's a lot to Price is Right. You're all over the stage, and there's no script. It's all ad lib, and it's demanding mentally and physically. And I know I used to finish the show, and I'd have an interview coming up, just as we're doing right now, and my voice would go sometimes in the interview, and I thought I don't want to try to do this too long, and I didn't, and I'm completely content. Of course, I'm busy, and that's good. I think that if you want to succeed in retirement, I think you should have some interests, and I certainly do in animals. And if you just sit and stare into space, then I think you can make a big mistake.
Well, okay, let's shift back just for a moment, Bob, before we start to wrap things up here in just a few minutes to The Price is Right. Johnny Olson, just want to say a moment about Johnny Olson. You know, in my experience, being with what broadcasting background I have, I don't think there's ever been, in my opinion, another announcer. He just had golden pipes, and he used them so well. But talk about your friendship with Johnny Olson and your professional relationship with him.
Well, first let me say that not only did I never work with a better announcer than Johnny Olson, I don't think there ever was a better announcer than Johnny Olson for what he did. And he did it better than any announcer. He did a splendid warm-up. He had those people practically on their feet by the time I was introduced. And he would go through a whole show flawlessly. If he fluffed, it startled you. You know, oh my gosh, he fluffed. Amazing. And beyond that, he was a gentleman, a Southern gentleman. He was just a wonderful man to work with, and he was a dear, dear friend.
That's great, and we lost him too soon, but he's never to be replaced.
No.
Your favorite memory, I hear you do have of The Price is Right, one of the wildest moments that ever happened on The Price is Right.
Well, I don't know that it's my favorite memory, but it is certainly the most memorable thing that ever happened on The Price is Right. There was a young lady seated in the audience in a tube top, and her name was called to be on the show. And she jumped to her feet and began jumping up and down, and both of them came right out over the top of the tube top as she came on down. Now, I didn't see this happen. I was still behind the door. She was the fourth contestant called up. And then, right up on the heels of that, I'm introduced. So out I come. Well, the audience is screaming. And I thought, well, they love me. They love me. And then I came to terms with the fact that no audience had ever loved me this much. And I turned to Johnny, and I said, Johnny, what's going on out here? And Johnny said, Bob, this girl has given her all for you.
Indeed she did. What a classic moment, because And you always you loved to do the show. You didn't want to stop because you felt like the spontaneity helped the show overall.
Oh, sure. We never, they didn't edit the show. I brought it out on time.
Yeah.
I grew up when you had to bring them out on time because they were live, And so today they tape shows 5-10 minutes long and they edit. I didn't. First of all, I didn't want things edited. I wanted them to be what I had done. But in all truthfulness, I think a show of that type plays better if it's live. And when things would go wrong, we would frequently get more laughs with what was going wrong than what we had planned, particularly on Truth or Consequences. On Truth or Consequences, it was all live, and you got what you did. And I had moments on Truth or Consequences when I had to talk pretty fast.
And I love the way you would fill those moments, as we said. Shifting gears just a little bit, Bob, to other spontaneous things that I'm sure happened over the years. But as I said at the top of this interview, for 21 consecutive years, you hosted the Miss Universe pageant. And that had to be quite an experience in and of itself. What are some of your favorite memories of those years?
Well, I would imagine that my favorite memory is surviving the Universe pageant in Perth, Australia, and the fact that all of the contestants survived as well. I had just crowned Miss Universe, and believe it or not, the stage collapsed. Just began to collapse, and girls were just flying down there into this hole. And I rushed up to the edge of this, and Miss Universe, she'd gone down with the rest of them, and I reached down and was trying to get her out of there. Well, fortunately, no one was injured. And I don't know how they didn't break an ankle or a knee or a leg or something, but they didn't. And Miss Universe got back out of there, and I straightened her crown. But now this picture was all over the country. And as I said, I was reaching down to get her hand. What they showed was her reaching up. I was cut out. That's the story of my life.
I love it. Wow, the stage collapsed.
The stage collapsed right at the end of the show, and that was live, too.
Exactly. Unbelievable. Well, and again, we could talk so much. You've hosted parades, the Tournament of Roses parade, and you've been
21 years.
How long?
21.
21 years for the Tournament of Roses.
That's my magic number. I did the Indianapolis 500 parade for syndicated television, 21 years. I did the produced and hosted the Pillsbury Bake Off for 21 years.
Wow. So Magic 21.
Magic 21.
No question about that. When we close here in just a few minutes, Bob, I do want to talk about how you have been so busy since you retired from broadcasting, but there's one more story that I know the listeners want to hear about, and that is Adam Sandler and Happy Gilmore. Talk about that.
Well, Adam actually wrote that scene himself. And then they called me and asked me if I would do it. And I said, do I win the fight or does Adam win? They said, you win the fight. I said, I'll do it. Because I'd been studying karate with Chuck Norris. My garage here was a karate studio.
Wow.
Chuck had come over twice a week and beat me up. I never won a fight.
Well, if you're going to lose a karate fight to someone, I think it's Chuck Norris is the one you want to lose it to.
A lot of people have.
Exactly.
But in any event, I wanted to win a fight. So I said, yes, I'll do it. So I went up there to Canada, and the night before we went out to shoot on the golf course, the director came up, and he went through the whole thing with me, and I said, fine. He said, now, Bob, he said, don't worry about the fight scenes. He said, I have a stunt man there, and he'll do the fight scenes. You don't have. I said, "Are you kidding?" I said, "I came up here to beat up Adam Sandler. I'm not going to have some stuntman out there." I said, "I know how to fight." So I did, and it was just great fun. I did the whole thing. I did all the fight scenes. The only thing I didn't do was that roll down the hill. The stuntman did that, and he hurt himself doing it. But I did that in, I think the picture was released in 1994. And I went ahead and did Price is Right until 2007. That's 13 years. I never taped a Price is Right that during the commercials, I always talked with the audience during the commercials. I never went off stage. People wanted to talk about Happy Gilmore, young men particularly. Young men loved that picture. They'd say, "Could you really whip Adam Sandler? In real life, could you really whip Adam Sandler?" I'd say, "Are you kidding? Adam Sandler couldn't whip Regis Philbin."
And didn't you write in your book that you tried that line with other names, but Regis always...
I'd say, Adam Sandler couldn't whip Alex Trebek. Well, they'd laugh, but not nearly as much. Or he couldn't whip him, this guy or that guy. Regis Philbin's man. He's the one that works with.
I love it. Well, the incredible stuff, Bob. I love it. And so now we'll wrap up with what you've been doing to be so busy these days since retiring from The Price is Right and broadcasting and all the things. Talk about the DJ&T Foundation. Of course, that stands for Dorothy Jo, your wife, and Tilly, your mom. Talk about the DJ&T Foundation.
Well, the DJ&T Foundation has been a huge success. It really has. And what we do is to fund clinic grants. A group will need equipment for their existing clinic, or an animal-oriented organization will be establishing a clinic. We'll help provide that, costs for that. And the clinic grants are very popular, but I think maybe the spay-neuter grants are even more popular. What we do there is to find an organization. They make applications, and Nancy Burnett, she does the interviews with these people, and decides that they know what we want and we'll do it well and so on. Well, we will provide a grant then, and we have organizations in every state in the union and multiple organizations in many states, and they find a veterinarian or veterinarians, multiple, in their area who will accept the grants. I mean the coupons, and then they issue the coupon. They go out and the person who has the animal goes out and uses that to get the spay-neuter, and then the veterinarian bills that local organization, and at the end of the month, the local organization bills us for all of the spay-neuters. And we are doing spay-neuters by the thousands that we have over the years. I was once told that we're spaying-neutering most of the dogs in Oklahoma.
You know, what an impact that has had by saying it.
Impact is right. That's the word. It has had an impact.
And that's, of course, what you want. And, Bob, the fact that you are who you are, this just shows who you are in my book, that your care for animals, and you don't just talk about it, you put your money where your mouth is and your energy where your mouth is. And so that to me is if that were all you did in your illustrious career, that is impressive and beautiful, but the fact that you're doing that on top of everything else is just incredible. And you know, I will add as we close down. Well, before we do though, any final words about DJ&T Foundation? Is there a website or something that or any way that people can come support it?
Well, I'm computer illiterate, so I can't give you much information, but I do know we have a website. Okay. And if you'll just Google it, is that what you do? Mm-hmm. All right, if you Google DJ&T Foundation, you can get all the information. There are is complete explanation there, frequently asked questions, and we answer them.
That's wonderful, Bob, because we want to support it, absolutely, because you have been so tireless and continue to be so tireless in your efforts. It's inspiring, and that will continue, I know, for many, many years to come. Bob, I want to close by saying, what's always impressed me about you as a broadcaster is that the word class comes to mind. Just a class act.
That's a very nice thing to hear.
Well, it's true because my feeling about you, I've always heard that the camera magnifies the good or the bad in someone.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that if you're doing a show 5 days a week, as I did all those years, 2 of them part of the time, the viewer who really watches every day or most days probably knows you better than a lot of people with whom you are associated in business or even friends, because you on television over the long haul you are what you are.
That's exactly right. And who you are to millions, Bob, and have always been, is a class act who always respected, I think, the relationship between host and audience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right now, there are tour buses that go by my home here, and during the tourist season, it seems like there's one out there every time I go out. And I talk with them and still do, and I feel that listen, I owe it all to them. Without them, Bob Barker nobody had ever heard of him.
Well, again, Bob, you are that's who you are, and we know it. And let me say to those listeners, my time with you today, Bob, has just underscored that many, many times over, that what we have seen all of those years is who you are. And it's a delight to be here with you today, Bob, and it's an honor.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, absolutely. And of course, Bob, you know that whenever you want to come back, you've got a place in our hearts and will always be there. But we know that you're doing what you deserve after all those hard years of work. And that makes us very happy that you are doing what you most want to do now and looking as good as ever, looking great.
Thank you. Well, I have people tell me, Barker, why don't you could still do that show? You look fine, and you still sound you're still thinking relatively straight, and so on. Well, I probably could do it one day, but I may have trouble getting out of bed the next day.
But I'll bet you could still whip Adam Sandler.
Anytime.
Bob, thank you so much for your time with us on Hollywood 360, and I'm not going to close this interview with you sitting here. You're the only one who can close this interview with your signature sign-off all those years. Bob, would you do me the honor?
Well, it's a profound thought. Help control the pet population. Have your pet spayed or neutered.
Thank you, Bob. For Hollywood 360, this is Mark Cavanis.